Hello there. This is Dr. Net. Maraming salamat for being here. Welcome to the Brown Psych YouTube channel. And today I'm so excited to have our very first guest, Cynthia. She's a licensed clinical social worker and she has a practice in Los Angeles, California. For those who want to connect with Cynthia, she's the founder of Living Fully Therapy, and she is licensed in New York and in California. And I'm gonna give the floor to Cynthia to also tell us. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself. And welcome to our first
Oh,
ever,
this is
your
an
first
honor.
guest.
Thank
Yes.
you. I'm the founder therapist for Living Fully Therapy, and I focus my work with high achieving caretakers because I am one in recovery myself. so, um, so that is primarily who I see, and what we work on are things um, like identity transitions, imposter syndrome, um, and it's like general self-esteem. I think some of those things are pretty common, and then also communication, like learning how to ask for what we need in safe ways and in comfortable, or maybe not comfortable always, but in ways that work for us. And so yeah, and then let's see what else. I do presentations and such sometimes. You and I were, before we hopped on the recording, we're just talking about my workshop, Kapwa Healing Conversations, and that is my attempt at making practical the Filipino value of Kapwa. And its aim, yeah, I know, I'm super proud of it. And its aim is to try and help us develop the skills, because I feel like one of the things that comes up in sessions for me is that we weren't taught these skills. um,
Mhm.
and but like skills in conversation to help us feel connected to other people. So that's another facet of my work.
Awesome, Cynthia.
Mhm.
And I was just telling you earlier before we started recording that my dog is sleeping kind of beside me, and hopefully the mic is not catching
It's cute.
because he
Who-
snores. He
Whoever's
snores.
listening will get a little snore.
Yes, that's Harry.
Hmm.
So, Cynthia, it's May and it's Mental Health Awareness Month and also
Mhm.
Asian American Pacific Heritage. Wait, Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month.
Mhm.
One of the advocacies that I have for this passion project is to, normalize, going to counseling, normalize that we all have a mental health, even though we don't
Yeah.
talk about it, especially
Yeah.
in the Philippines and in the Filipino diaspora. But we
Mhm.
all have mental health that we have to take care of. I'm
Yes.
just curious if you can give us a little bit of background on how you got into the field.
Yeah.
Then maybe later on we'll talk about like your own mental health journey. And also
Sure.
feel free to ask me if you want. Although in another recording, I think I kind of mentioned a little bit of that too.
Okay.
Mhm.
Sure. So then, what led me into the field? I think my own curiosity for emotions, understanding emotions. I think growing up I grew up in California, Northern California, the Bay Area, city of Vallejo, for people who know it. Um, and the thing that I most like to normalize is that in my family there weren't really words for emotions.
Yeah.
There was more just one word, and the word was weird.
Mhm.
Um, and it was like, I feel weird, and like I know that in trying to almost like decipher what the weird meant, because the weird could mean sad, the weird could mean uncomfortable, the weird could mean angry, the weird could be like frustrated, it could be all sorts of things. But I did have to somewhat decode what weird meant. And I think in my needing to do that in my family and for myself, I think I had a strong curiosity for understanding us, understanding our human condition of emotions. And so I really, um, I really wanted to understand that, and had some guidance through my studies, like undergraduate, to pursue social work.
Nice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So your undergrad was already in the field, like within so.
Oh, it was actually in sociology.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And some of my favorite sociology courses involved like um, like civilization and sociology, or like
Mhm.
people. Let me think. I'm trying to remember the. Uh, it was like specific demographics in sociology, so like women in sociology,
Got it.
or or like how we developed as a city, kind of like how we developed as a community, in sociology.
Got it. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
you must have been inspired by so many, feminists, and the feminist
Yeah.
movement, I can imagine, also in California. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, I really I went to UC Santa Cruz, um, and one of my favorite professors there, Wendy Martina,
Mhm.
she had sort of sparked my interest in reading basically young adult novels,
Yeah.
and starting to understand the framework, or the sort of contexts that the characters were living inside of.
Mhm.
And so I think in doing that, I think that really gave me what has become my part of my approach with people, is like I'm only, like, I look at um, how people are affected by their environments,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
it is so
Mhm.
decisive.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, I attended a conference once, and one of my favorite phrases that I took from that conference was like, before you go and diagnose yourself as depressed, make sure you're not surrounded by assholes.
Right. Yeah.
and,
Uh-huh.
and I
Yeah.
was like,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah, that's
Mhm.
important.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. I made like a social media post, about how like the system
Mm-hmm.
and like how colonialism too is like, if we don't talk about
Mm,
that, then like how are you going to talk about the mental health, right?
yeah, yeah,
Like it's
yeah,
so
we
true.
can't.
You take out the system, or like if the system is kind of helping you, how much easier will it be for our mental wellness, right? Like
Yeah.
I mean, like not just here in America with the economy and everything, but I can even imagine like growing up in the Philippines,
Mm-mm. Yeah.
being raised there with all the
I
systemic
mean,
issues in the
I
economy.
I
Yeah.
think like some of the like more like for my family growing
Hmm.
up in the Philippines through the 50s, 60s, and
Hmm.
70s, there was a lot of sort of political silence that people were put into.
Hmm.
So, I think as I started to understand the context that my own family grew up inside of, then the weird, like saying weird, made sense. It was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh, I we just didn't, like, we just couldn't talk, period, because it
Hmm.
was a potential threat to life for talking.
Hmm.
And so I hold a lot of compassion for that generation of people who grew up in the Philippines, because I can't even imagine how scary,
Hmm.
um, and honestly terrifying that must have been.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, not to minimize also like, the experience of the Filipino Americans who grew up here as well,
Totally.
but
It's
maybe
totally a separate deal.
yeah. Hmm.
But it is, it is sort of, it can make sense of it and doesn't necessarily like excuse it.
Right. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, Cynthia, maybe that's a good segue for us to kind of if that's okay for you, if
Mhm.
you're willing to talk about it, like growing up in a Filipino household,
Mhm.
how's that
Yeah.
working out for first gen,
Ah,
parents? Now you're the second gen here.
yeah. So my first gen parents,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm understanding is really, really common. They worked so hard for us. I mean, they were like, my dad would be like out at 6 or 5 a.m. sometimes, back at
Mm-hmm.
4. My mom would like take the next shift and like leave at 2, and then like be back at midnight or whatever. So they basically, the two of them as a partnership, never really saw each other,
Mm-hmm.
until they had a day off, which was rare.
I see.
And so they didn't really have, um, like growing up, I didn't really have them both in the same house much of the time. Like I think recently I was talking with with my mom and my siblings. I have two ates,
Mm-hmm.
and my mom was talking about how she had rarely been around for holidays. Like she would cook in the morning, but she would leave because she had to.
Yeah.
But my dad, so my mom was a nurse, and my dad was in the postal service.
Got it.
Um, they came here. My mom was a part of like the nurse outsourcing that had
Mhm.
happened in the Philippines,
Got it.
and so she came to the States through Philadelphia,
Mhm.
and was like with a group of like 10 or 20 other nurses who came over. So they
Yeah.
were like a little tight knit community themselves. And they had like a host family here. And then my dad, he came to the States because he was a part of the US Navy, and he was stationed around Philadelphia.
Got it.
And then so the two of them met in
Mhm.
Philadelphia.
Mhm.
Um, and and yeah, so that's how they came to be together. Um, where yeah, I'm just thinking about like all the things I could say about my own mental health journey. I think I've done a number of speaking engagements about it. I
Mhm.
mentioned briefly earlier that I am a high achieving caretaker in recovery, meaning I'm not perfect with it. I'm still working on it, but I think the main things that I want to mention about that experience was that my my history in my history I have struggled and dealt with depression and anxiety and trauma.
Mhm.
And so I am cognizant of the fact that it's something that I live with.
Mhm.
And like, as a matter of fact, just the other day had a panic attack. And
Mhm.
like, I was just like, I didn't really know what was bringing it on
Mhm.
until after I was through it.
Got it.
Um, but in the moment, I know that historically, when I first started having panic attacks, I was like, oh my God, like, what is this thing?
Mhm.
Definitely went to the ER because I was like, I'm sure I'm dying.
Mhm.
But then, like, after enough of that, I was like, oh, this is my mental health.
Yeah.
This
Mhm.
isn't my physical health. My physical health is totally checking out. Like, all the tests are done, all the labs are done.
Right.
Totally clean bill of health, physical health.
Mhm.
Um, and starting to understand what was bringing on and triggering me, um, and why those things triggered me, I think has been a huge part of my journey.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that uh, some of my passion for making sure that people have this information
Yeah.
comes from my own experience of basically getting to the height of what if you had asked me 10 years ago, like, what do you want to do?
Mhm.
I would have said, oh, I want to be a manager or director of a program, of a mental health program, and I
Mhm.
want to have a small private practice.
Got it. Yeah.
I got to that place. It was super overwhelming. I would
Mhm.
tell myself like, oh, but it's so good. And it was like I enjoyed a lot of it.
Mhm.
But let me see, the level that I had been working myself had
Mhm.
sort of made me thin. There's like there's that saying of like being worked to like a thinness. There's
Yeah.
like there's not a very solid kind of base that I'm functioning off of.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, and so when I had something really scary happen at work, it just totally obliterated any of that. I was
Mhm.
really like, I I don't know if I feel safe here. I don't know if I can pretend like, and I was responsible for 10 plus clinicians at the
Mhm.
time. I was like,
Right.
I don't know if I can like in good faith show up and be like, you're safe if
Mhm.
I am not feeling safe.
Right. Yeah.
And so that actually led me to need to step away from that role
Mhm. Mhm.
and and yeah, and just make sure that what's that called? I just took that time and made sure that I could return to a sense of safety.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's so true to Cynthia, right? Like when we sometimes, and I don't know if it's, I know that it happens with others too, but I think more in our culture, like
Mhm.
we need to reach that point
That
where we're,
edge.
yeah,
Yeah.
at the edge,
Hmm.
right?
And
Because I
I,
think we're
yeah.
taught that, by the way, these are the signs, like no one talks about it.
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
Out, you know.
Yeah, no. I mean, that is one of the topics that I find myself presenting
Mhm.
on most often, is like just like identifying when burnout is
Yeah.
approaching
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
when burnout is there
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
people I think again like this context I
Yeah.
think
Mhm.
we had in the 2010s of time. I think there was like a huge push for like the grind
Mhm.
and boss women
Yeah.
or boss ladies,
Yes. Yes.
um and people boss. I mean, I know I boss ladied really hard.
Mhm.
and um and that kind of had me pushing to almost like what I would call it an inhumane point. Like I left that position that I was at in the clinic, and I learned through the grapevine of people I was stayed connected to that they
Mhm.
had like four people
Yeah.
covering the work I was doing there when I left,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
and that the role itself stayed vacant for at least a couple of years before
Oh
they
my
could find
gosh.
somebody to take it on.
Wow. Mhm.
And so I think, and I am finding it in my practice. I am meeting multiple people who are in that position where
Mhm.
they're like kind of at the height of their career, and they're
Mhm.
like, what did I get myself into? um, and not because they weren't talented or because they weren't being mindful. It was like that they had set this direction and then went for it
Mhm.
and then found like there was something about it that wasn't sustainable.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. So Cynthia, as you were talking,
Hmm.
I wanted to share because like this
Yeah, please.
happened to my daughter actually. So I
Mm.
have she's 17 now, believe it or not. She just
Oh,
attended her prom, I know, like last week,
oh
but
my God. Yeah.
was it? I think it was like last year when she had. So we don't only do it with ourselves, right? Like sometimes it gets passed on to our children, unfortunately. So she was
Yeah.
doing taekwondo. She was doing a lot of AP classes,
Mm-hmm.
and then she was doing like piano lessons. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it was like, and then she was also doing her volunteer work because here in
Mm-hmm.
Florida, she's applying for the Bright Future Scholarship, but you have a
Mm-hmm.
certain amount of hours to be able to volunteer to
To volunteer. Yeah.
so her Saturdays are fully booked. And then like she was in her room, just like, she was not doing well. And I think at one point, like she was crying. And then I said to her, Maya, look at the schedule that you have, because like
Mhm.
she's the one who actually like wanted to do all of those.
Totally. Yeah, it's like we want it. We want to do these things.
Yeah, she's like, but
Yeah.
mom, the taekwondo helps me with like this and like that. And sure, like because they have kind of like stretches, which are kind of like yoga, sort of like
Mhm.
it's really a self-care thing. But I
Mhm.
think just going 2 to 3 times per week on top
Yeah.
of her homework, which by the
Yes.
way sometimes takes her until like 11 or 12 at night to
Yeah.
finish,
Yeah.
because like she has all of these activities. And so we had like a really, serious talk. And then, she eventually kind of realized after talking to me that, wow,
Mhm.
I do have to scale down.
Yeah.
So,
That sounds
yes.
so
Hmm.
familiar. I
Yeah.
felt like your daughter in high
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
I don't know that I had the wisdom at the time to check
Mhm.
how stressed out I was.
Yeah. Hmm.
But like, yeah, I think that there's a it's a systemic there's a systemic issue around that.
Right.
Like I would go and do those activities. Oh, yes, I was interested in them, but because like for me at the time, my parents were not home or my
Hmm.
siblings weren't home. So I was like, I don't want to go home. That's boring. Like I want to go out and do something. So just by that influence, my day as a young person
Hmm.
was being influenced by my parents' work schedule,
Hmm.
which demanded of them a great deal.
Hmm.
So like, whereas like I described my parents' schedule, my schedule wasn't that dissimilar. It was just like kind of from like 6 a.m., 6:30 a.m. I'd be at school for zero period, and then I'd stay until basically 6:37 p.m. at night.
Yeah.
And like that wasn't I mean like yes, I chose those things that I wanted to do, but I also had this sort of social environmental kind of reinforcement that I needed to have my day look like that.
Yeah. Hmm.
um and I say that not as like blaming my parents. Like my parents are it's beyond my parents.
Hmm.
It's a larger issue around the capitalist structure that
Yeah.
we have, the oppressive structure that has been built in Western culture around this epitomizing of work,
Hmm.
um, over work in an industrial age, post-industrial age,
Right.
where we're almost expected to work like computers, like
Hmm.
machines, like
Yeah. Hmm.
and produce that consistent result. And it's
Yeah.
like there is nothing consistent about us. We are changing every day.
Hmm.
I'm not the same person I was yesterday.
Hmm.
But the way that work is structured, the way that our society has been structured is like consistency is like gold.
Yeah. Hmm. Yep.
Hmm.
Hmm. I think I shared with you like an earlier phone call about how I outsource my, virtual assistants,
Mm,
all
mm,
the
mhm,
people that I'm trying to kind
mhm.
of pay attention also, because that's one of my ways to give back in the community in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And when so I have this is like my second VA now, because the other,
Mm, mhm,
like I think she lasted about 6 months or something like that.
mhm,
But that's one of the things that I would put on my, should they help me with my social media posts. But that's
yeah.
one of the main themes that I would put in my social media posts, and how important it is for self-care and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because like they would, when we would have our meeting, it's like they're like, Doc, I'm learning so much from you. Like I know I'm juggling so many things and I'm burning out. And it's so true what you're saying in your post that, I should take care of myself. But
Mm.
I think that they're also kind of like in that rut, right? Like because
Oh
the
yeah.
Philippines is so westernized.
It's so
And especially
westernized.
like
Yeah.
a lot of people from Europe, America are outsourcing like Filipino talents, because they are really,
Hmm.
like they're hardworking, they're talented, um,
Yes.
and so a lot of people want to hire them, but then again, they take on so many projects and then they burn out.
Yes.
And I can see it in their work, like in the
Mm-hmm.
The work
In the quality of their work,
of the
in
work.
the delivery,
Yeah.
in, it's like I can't count how many times like I felt like, oh, that's just good enough. Like
Mhm.
at the
Mhm.
end of a project, or
Right.
at the end of a like a presentation or something.
Yeah. Hmm.
And the outlash of doing that,
Hmm.
is like commonly, I mentioned like imposter syndrome,
Right. Hmm.
is like for folks who are like me, like in that way, it's like they'll get to that point of like, okay, I've burnt out at the end of this thing, that's good enough.
Hmm.
And so there's a feeling of like, I didn't do all that I could do,
Hmm.
so therefore this thing isn't as good as I would hope it to be.
Right. Yeah. Hmm.
And to which I want to tell, both my younger self and anybody listening who feels like this sort of resonates with them, is that your 100% is somebody else's 120%.
Hmm.
Your 70% is somebody else's 100.
I love that. Yeah.
Is that it's not that this isn't enough. What you did was enough. That's
Hmm.
as much time as you had. That's how much bandwidth you had. You
Hmm.
couldn't have asked yourself for more. We couldn't have asked ourselves for more.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that there is just like such a consistent um, societal demand on time, to the point where people are alone in their rooms
Hmm.
feeling a tremendous pressure, but there's nobody there. It's just
Right.
them in the room.
Hmm. Hmm.
And but then like the nervous system is so jacked up that it feels like they're under threat.
Right. Hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. There was a study that, not the study, it's actually like, there's a newspaper in the Philippines called the Daily Inquirer, and I
Mm-hmm.
sometimes kind of like peruse, some of the Philippine news first,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of my family are still there, and I also want to keep abreast of up to what's as to what's going on. But
Mm-hmm.
there was a headline about like the current mental health status of
Yeah.
Filipinos right now, and like it's really skyrocketing.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's a whole
I mean, that is a whole episode of goodness, you
I
know.
yeah, I
I,
wanted to go. Are you gonna say something?
yeah, I wanted to ask, like this is your inaugural
Mhm.
recording. I wanted to
Mhm.
ask a little bit more about like what had you do this recording or do this YouTube channel, and then what's having you do, like what do you hope that, people who listen, people who watch
Mhm.
are getting from the conversations.
Yeah. So, to be able to answer that, maybe I'll answer it with like what inspired me to begin
Yeah.
with. And like you, like, I mean, that's also the reason I came into the mental health field, because like I had debilitating anxiety, when I was
Mm,
growing up. I had
mhm,
those panic attacks. I couldn't sleep at night. I was
mhm,
tossing and turning. Like my heart was like literally burning.
mhm,
And I
mhm.
was like in the Philippines, like a teenager, and I don't know what to do, because like
Yeah,
we were
yeah,
taught to pray, like push it under the rug.
yeah.
And counseling is also a taboo. And I think
Mhm.
my light on my right side just went out.
That's
But anyway,
okay.
um,
You look fantastic.
but I think that that's what inspired me to do this, because I know that if you don't have the means, you don't, and even if you probably have the means, there's also, I think the quote, to be honest with you, was when I was like reading some of the research, it's like I think 1 in 100,000 psychiatrists. For one Filipino, there's only for 100,000 Filipinos, there's only one psychiatrist.
I feel
And
like I know the one.
yeah, and then can you imagine also like the therapist too, right? Those
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
statistics, but if that statistics is wrong, please let us know below. But from what I read before,
Oh my
anyway,
God.
so I mean, like, there's really not a lot of resources. So you are like going to be left alone to kind of like rely apparently on your resilience, right? Like quote unquote
Mm-hmm.
resilience. That's
It's
something
like
I
made to be strong.
guess. Hmm.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's like why I kind of like really
Yeah.
see this, because I want,
Yes.
it's kind of like really my inner child work too, because
Yeah.
I feel like I'm, you know, like if I only had maybe a resource or a YouTube channel that will talk about like what I'm going through with people
Mm-hmm.
who look like me, you know, not
Mm-hmm.
like some white person who does
Yeah.
not know
Yeah.
the
There's
things.
enough of that out there.
Yeah.
Thank you to those folks for doing that work.
Hmm.
And yeah, there's a lack of people who look like us.
Yeah. So I mean,
Mhm.
and who will tell me that, by the way, what you're feeling is, you know, like that's what
Normal.
we go through. That's normal.
That's what we
Like,
go through.
yeah. Hmm.
That is, I mean, that's the base of Kapwa healing conversations. I love that because I feel like it's as close as we can get our emotions. I think this is
Hmm.
pretty firmly my opinion. So anybody can disagree, but I think that our emotions are probably just as close as we can get to a universal language.
Yeah.
Like I really think that's as close, like as a human species. I think that's as close as we can get, and I feel like that is part of part of what I think is so important about what you're doing, about what I'm doing, about what so many other, um, which has been amazing to meet some of the Filipino, Filipinx folks in our field.
Yeah.
I will say, like to add an anecdote um, to that statistic you shared just now. I didn't know, like, so I've been in the field since, in one way, shape, or form at different levels, since 2006.
Hmm.
And over the course of from 2006 to like 2019,
Hmm.
I think I had met less than a handful of clinicians who were Filipino.
Hmm. Yeah. Hmm.
That's a lot of people that I've worked with, and only to have less than a handful. I want to say it was like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And definitely like 3 or 4 who managed to like make it to like the sort of visible kind of like not even like my visibility, like who I saw in the day to day,
Hmm.
because the vast majority of people I was seeing, they were either white or they were other people of color, but not Filipino.
Hmm.
and and I do know that when I did meet our kapwa, I would say like, or our kapwa, our kapatid, there would be like an immediate like, you Filipino?
Yeah.
Okay, like I'm gonna make some lumpia. I'm gonna,
Hmm.
it's like I the program I ran had a kitchen,
Hmm.
and some of our IT folks were
Yeah.
Filipino, and they came down and they were like, "Hey, can we use the kitchen?" And I was like, "Yes."
Hmm.
And they're like, "Okay, we're gonna make lumpia. I'll bring you some." And I'm like,
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
and they were clinicians, but they were
Mhm.
at the clinic, and it's such a tremendous sense of home. I think, I don't know if you felt this, and when you came to, you're in Florida now,
Mhm.
um, but I know that myself, growing up in a predominantly Filipino American community,
Mhm.
I think as a young person, I took for granted how grounding that was, um, and how it let me feel confident in those spaces. And then I do see a sort of a direct correlation for me with moving away from that community and then having my mental health make like a nosedive.
I
So I
see.
don't know, what has your experience been with that been like?
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. So when I first came to America, I was actually in California. We were living in the San Francisco Bay Area, and that's
Is
where
that
I.
why you're a 925?
Yes, that's why I'm a 925.
I was like, oh, I
Yeah,
don't know
we
if
used
that's like a
to.
Google thing or like,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, we lived there for like 11 years, and
Okay.
that's where I went to grad school too, in the San Francisco Bay Area. So
Okay, gotcha.
yeah, so
Hmm.
even though I'm in Florida, there's like a big part of me that's kind of Californian, because that's sort of like how I
Yeah.
was introduced to, to America. But because of my husband's job and how the
Hmm.
universe took us here, I think that there's a
Yes.
purpose and why we're here for
Hmm.
sure.
Hmm.
Although I miss California a lot, but anyway, yeah, I mean, so it's interesting for me, Cynthia, because I came as an immigrant, right, to
Hmm.
California.
Hmm.
And I did form like a community there where,
Hmm.
because my immediate family is still back in the Philippines, they would just
Hmm.
come and visit every now and then. But
Hmm.
I had to form my own kind of, like chosen kind of immigrant
Chosen
family.
family.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because like whenever we moved to, so we've been around. So like after California, 11 years, we moved to Austin because of my
Hmm.
husband's job. Loved Austin.
Hmm.
And then we moved to the DFW area, and then now we're here. But
Hmm.
each place, that we go to, we always have like a Pinoy community, because I cannot
Without.
imagine how I would survive America without
Yeah.
my kapatids. Yeah.
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 I definitely um like it was like the little things that
Yeah.
I missed.
Mhm.
It was like I missed being able to go to my mom's place.
Mhm.
Because I went from the Bay Area, was eager to move out on my own. I lived in Emeryville for a while,
Mhm.
and then moved out to New York for my grad program.
Yeah.
And I think I really missed the ability, like, to go home and get baon.
Yeah.
It's like when when we would leave, and I remember being on the phone with my siblings and like hearing them like talk about like visiting mom and like um mom's like, oh, take whatever from my pantry, like like those things I would miss like
Yeah.
crazy. And I know I would be in New York crying because I was like, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I could I wish I could go home and like
Mhm.
you know um have mom cook for me and then take a little like take some in like a Tupperware or a Ziploc home.
Yeah.
Like I want
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Um, but I did want to, and it's mixed. It's like I did want to pursue a graduate degree. I did
Mhm.
want to move to New York at some point in my life. I think I had that dream as a young person to live there, but I didn't really have a concept or understanding of what that separation would mean for my mental health. I didn't even really understand that mental health was a thing.
Mhm.
Um, and
Yeah.
whenever I talk with folks about like we all have mental health, it's like you can have good mental
Mhm.
health.
Mhm.
Like it's pretty solid. Just like people don't really need to go to their doctor
Mhm.
frequently. It's like there are those folks with their mental health,
Mhm.
and then there are folks who like have asthma, the
Mhm.
asthma equivalent of mental health issues,
Mhm.
or pneumonia, or cancer,
Mhm.
or it's like all of those kind of varying degrees of health and non-health. Like I think we all like different people have different stuff with it. So
Yeah.
I think that that feels important to mention. But
Yeah. Mhm. So, Cynthia, I'm going to transition a little bit here. I didn't realize that we've been talking for apparently 38 minutes now.
ah, so
I know I've
easy.
been
Thank
talking
you. You're so easy to talk to.
yeah. But I was gonna say to you, for like especially the youngins, right? Like who are
Yeah.
listening, we have quite a bit of followers, I think, who are interested in this. I feel
Hmm.
like the older generations, they kind of like, at least with my social media presence, right? Like I feel like they kind of like lurk, but they don't really kind of engage.
They're not engaging.
There's not this, yeah. But I know
Sure.
that we also have quite a bit of youngins, which, by the
Yeah.
way, someone just messaged me the other day. I sent your information to her. She's from California. Anyway,
Oh, yay! Thank
hopefully she
you.
reaches out to you. But I feel like the people who message me, like on IG, are like more like kind of the youngins.
Hmm.
obviously a lot of them are from California, but I'm not licensed in California, so
Sure. That's okay.
there's
You've got people.
yeah.
You've got what we've. Did you see that we dubbed it the Halo Halo
Hello.
Collective?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
It's so cute.
So anyway, like I was gonna ask you,
Yeah,
what's been most helpful for you in your own Filipino mental health and in your own healing journey?
I think. Let me think. What has been most helpful? I think learning the words to talk about mental health.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Like I think I and listening to stories
Mm-hmm.
from
I
other
see.
people. I think that's part of how
Like
I
our story.
learned, like our stories
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I've listened to a number of people. Not always, they weren't always Filipino themselves, but sometimes
Mm-hmm.
um, talking about their mental health journeys and just being able to put words to my own experience.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think that's been tremendously helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's why Michelle and I actually, or like what Michelle and I actually do when we're doing our work too.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um,
That's right. Do you want to talk about like your podcast too, Cynthia? Now that we're
sure.
on the topic, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, yeah. I so another clinician and I. So Michelle Mercado Martinez.
Mm-hmm.
She is a clinician out here in California as well.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Net and I jointly know. And she and I have a podcast called Ask Your Authors, where we basically just take on talking about different mental health topics,
Mm-hmm.
and sharing our own experiences,
Yeah.
because I think both of us we sort of joined on like, oh, this is helpful for us, let's do this for our community.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so like I think our most recent conversation was about anger, and that
I
one is
see.
fun, so that
Yeah.
one's
Uh-huh.
coming
Oh, I
for
love
mental health
anger. Yeah.
awareness.
Uh-huh. Yeah. This is like anger is like I think one of the topics that um is so elusive in the Filipino community because we are not
It's
allowed.
there.
We are not allowed to be angry.
It's there, and it's not always loud.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. I feel like she and I have very, like we're similar in some ways, but very different in others. Like
Yeah. Mhm.
she, as if people take a listen to this particular episode, she talks about how she was like really expressive with her anger
Mhm.
and what that was like for her. And
Mhm.
then I'm talking about how I wasn't
Mhm.
expressive with
Yeah.
anger and how that was
Yeah.
like for me and what that did with
Yeah.
me and my mental health. So
Yeah.
I think like I like that we're sort of on two ends,
Mhm.
not polar ends
Mhm.
sometimes maybe, but we're on the other ends of the spectrum with
Mhm.
things sort of consistently, which is kind of something I just noticed in this moment. But is I think is good, because I think one of the things we want to communicate
Mhm.
is that there's not really a right way.
Mhm.
There's
Yeah.
not a, it's
Mhm.
like the way that we do it isn't
Yeah.
necessarily the same for everybody.
Mhm. Okay. So, Cynthia, before we end our
Hmm.
episode today, one of the biggest things that I'm noticing also, like with talking with Filipino clients and just
Hmm.
friends and even VAs. I have a lot of conversations with my VAs
Good. Yeah.
about stuff because they're so curious as to what we're
Yeah.
doing and to the post that they're kind of helping me out with. Like I
Hmm.
said, they always say that they learn a lot from it. But um, what has been your experience growing up here as a second gen when it comes to the colonial mentality, and how has that affected your upbringing? And I can even imagine your relationship and their relationship with you with your parents.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So my relationship with colonial mentality is that I didn't know I had it
Huh?
until until there were like sort of these micro moments of like, oh, I'm Filipino, like not like, oh, I'm Filipino, but oh, I'm not white.
Mhm.
I'm not. I think one of the it's like a, you know how there's like a what is it called, body dysmorphia. I
Mm,
almost had like
mhm.
an ethnic dysmorphia.
Got it. Yeah.
And one of the moments that I cite probably most often because it's kind of funny,
Yeah.
um, was I remember going to a makeup store with
Hmm.
a friend of mine
Yeah.
and telling them like I had gotten some makeup, and he was like, "Oh, what did you get?" And I was like, "I got bronzer."
Hmm.
He was like, "Girl, you are brown.
Hmm.
That is just what's not going to do anything."
Hmm.
And he was right, because at the time it was like there wasn't like lots of shades of bronze,
So got
uh,
it. Yeah.
like
I see.
contour or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, "No, no, I did something. I liked it." Blah blah blah. And then he
Mhm.
was like, "Look, put it on." And like I put it
Mhm.
on, and like really, all that the bronzer did was like sparkle me. Like that was it. Um, and there were moments when I would feel um, like to pursue the sort of American or white
Mhm.
thing was like
Yeah.
the better thing to do.
Mhm.
Like, and not to say like I regret any of my accomplishments, but
Mhm.
I do think that I had like a white supremacist kind of inundation in my mind of like, oh, I don't want to go to this school. I want to go to that school. Or
Right.
like, I don't want to do this kind of job. I want to do this kind of job. You know, like there were kind of different, like there wasn't like a sort of equal thing for me in my mind of like what certain paths look like initially. And like, I think I have a lot of how that impacted me and my parents. It was like they didn't, and I'm Filipino American, so I think
Mhm.
like a big part for me was balancing between that sort of American side of me, that colonialized side of me, and my Filipino side. So on my Filipino side, I really wanted to please my parents.
Mhm.
Initially, I know that I was doing a lot of choir in high school, and I was like, oh, I want to sing. I want to be a singer.
Mhm.
Um, and I, like many, were told like, no, do something like practical,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, and like nursing, do nursing.
Yeah.
I couldn't, in my American kind of mindset, I was like, no, I can't do nursing. Um, it's not it's not a good fit for me. Like, I think that there is like a very strong, uh, like individualistic vein in me with that. And I was like, oh, that may have fit for you, but that didn't fit for me kind
Mhm.
of attitude. Um, and and so I was like, well, to and in a lot of ways I feel like social work is kind of an embodiment of being Filipino American. I
Mhm.
feel, or like our work in general is like
Mhm.
we're in the health field, but we're talking and we're having conversations rather than kind of like doing, like the really like key stuff for sustaining life,
Mhm.
like giving people their medications, for example.
Right. Yeah.
It's a different way to care for people, but I found it to be the way that I could, and I think the my parents didn't really understand it at first, like what I was
Mhm.
trying to do and what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
Um, but I think as years have gone on, and they not only saw me like going further and further in my career,
Mhm.
but also saw like the healing journey I was on with it as well. I think they understood it more, and um, I feel like I've coined the term emotional leader, but I definitely feel like the emotional leader in my family in that way of like I was the first to go to therapy in my family, and for a long time therapy was like the thing that sin did because sin needs it. and there was a lot of shame around it at first, but I was like, you know what, I need it. So like I'm I
Mhm.
need it too much to feel the shame, essentially.
Mhm.
Um, to the point where today, like I think all but maybe one immediate family member has gone to therapy,
Mm. Mhm.
and I feel, and now I think that there's a better understanding of what therapy and mental health work entails, and what it is that I do.
Mhm.
And so I feel like there's a better understanding now,
Mhm.
than there was before between me and my parents specifically.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that is so true. I have like my own stories on what people thought. Like
Yeah.
when was that? Like I
Uh,
entered grad school a long time ago. I'm not gonna mention it here, but
that is okay. We don't have to talk about that.
they're like, why,
We'll just
why, why can't you just become a nurse or a real doctor? Like, why are you going to go into grad school
yeah.
to be a psychologist? But anyway, yeah, no.
You are a real doctor,
Yeah.
Dr. Nat.
I think that they mean like medical doctor.
Mm,
Like, yeah, you
I
know.
know, but
Oh, yeah.
it's
Mhm.
one of those things of like
Yeah.
the hierarchy
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
of what a doctor is,
Mhm. Yeah.
and it's like I think one of the things in our heritage that I have been just so enthralled to learn more and more about is Babaylan,
That's right. Yeah. Mhm.
and how our community, our culture is historically matriarchal,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that Babaylans were different kinds of healers, like
Mhm.
different kinds of like community workers
Yeah.
that were highly respected. And
Right.
to think about the difference between that and like your parents or my parents saying like, why don't you go be a nurse, why don't you go be a doctor, why don't you go be a, for me they were like, why don't you go be a lawyer, um
Mm.
because apparently they were like, you like to talk. I was like,
Mhm. Yeah.
um so yeah,
Mhm.
but yeah, that has been a fun uh part of my own reading, my own
Mhm.
relearning.
Got it. Yeah. All
Yeah.
right, Cynthia, we're almost at that hour. I look
Well,
at the time.
I
I know.
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being here. Do you want to invite those who are listening and to those who are watching on your like IG and all
Oh
your other projects?
yeah,
Want
please.
to end before you go?
If you'd like to, stay connected or connect with me, or talk to me for any reason, I'm on Instagram. You can find me at Living Fully IG. I had to think about that for a second. Um, you can listen to myself and your Ate Michelle Mercado Martinez at Ask Your Ates, which is a podcast that you can find wherever you listen to podcasts. Or if you're in the Los Angeles area, I will be hosting Kapwa Healing conversations, what sounds like kind of regularly at a local uh, philosophical research center. Um, yeah, so that is to be coming, but yeah, you'll hear most of that from my Instagram. So
Yeah. Congratulations, Cynthia, and thank you
thank
for
you.
being with us here in community. I love always. I just love your energy. Even Cynthia and I are in this like Filipino consultation group that I haven't attended in a long time because of all of this that
Oh
I.
my gosh, yeah, because of life.
But I'm so grateful for you sharing us your own journey and your own healing, and also normalizing that even us therapists, we go to our own therapy. I still go
Yeah,
to my own therapist every other week, and
yep,
I love
yep,
it.
same.
I love knowing my biases and all that
Hmm.
stuff, and
Yeah.
continuing to heal. But thank you so much for being here. And Cynthia will be back. She promised me that she'll be back in other episodes too.
Yes, anytime,
Yeah, maybe we can
anytime
talk about
you.
like the papaya line stuff.
Oh my God, that sounds so fun.
Eventually,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
we should talk about the Babaylan together.
Okay, Cynthia. Well,
All right.
maraming salamat. And for those of you who stay tuned, thank you so much for being here. And I will see you in the next one.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Mhm.